All right, here we go. Hey, this is Pat Traylor, president of the Associated Press Photo Managers, APPM, here hosting another installment or video hangout series today, talking about drones and photojournalism. I've got Aaron Levinsky, staff photographer at the Minneapolis Star Tribune, Andrew Scott, managing photo editor at USA Today, heading up their Gannett's company-wide drone program, and Matt Waite, professor at University of Nebraska and an instructor with Pointer as well, talking about drones. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for having being here. And Matt, I just want to say to anybody watching, Matt's going to be one of our speakers at our annual conference coming up in Washington, D.C., October 8th through 11. So if you're going to be in the DC area, definitely come check us out. Check out what we got going on there. We'll have our overall speaker list will be announced soon. But for now, let's talk about drones, and I'll open it up to each of you guys. Maybe just give me a little background about who you are, and then how what got you interested in drones, bringing drones into your work. So I'm going to go from left to right on my screen. So Aaron, start with you.
Great. Yeah, I'm Aaron Levinsky, and I'm a staff photographer at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. I've been there coming up on 3 years this fall, and I've been flying drones since about last July. We started working on an environmental story about the Mississippi River, and there are no mountains or high vantage points to shoot from, so I figured it might be a good way to tell the story. And kind of snowballed from there, and now we're trying to expand our drone use however we can when it's necessary.
Cool. Andy?
Yeah, Andy Scott, Deputy Managing Editor at USA Today. I am the Director of Area of Operations for all of Gannett's drone program. I've been at this about 3 years. Kind of got involved with it based on conversations with our legal department around some issues that were cropping up at some of our properties, and that really coincided with the creation of the News Media Coalition, which initially was Gannett, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Sinclair Broadcasting, and it eventually included about 17 member media organizations. The News Media Coalition has been active in lobbying the FAA and really shaped a lot of the rules, and especially First Amendment issues that were addressed on some level in the 107 space. It's kind of been a long road. When we started this, it was the Wild West. There were no rules. And then we went to the FAA. The FAA had a complete shutdown of everything. And then we had Section 333s, and then we're in the 107 space. So it's been an evolution on how we were approaching this, and it's been a lot of starts and stops as we've built our program based around the regulatory space. But right now we are in the process of rolling out our drone program. We're doing a soft rollout to test 10 test markets. And then we're learning from that, and then we'll eventually roll out to a lot more in the company.
Cool. And Matt?
I guess I'm the resident graybeard. I started the drone journalism lab here at the University of Nebraska in 2011, and was on the bleeding end of the spear when we talk about the Wild West. I am one of the proud recipients of one of about 24 cease and desist orders that were issued by the FAA, because they had no clue in the world what to do about a journalism school that wanted to teach people how to fly drones for journalism. So they shut us down back in 2013. I got a pilot's license to get a 333 exemption, which they sat on for 9 months because they still didn't know what the hell to do with us. And then they ended up canceling it and saying, well, 107's here, so just go do that. So I've been around the world talking about drones, have flown them on 3 different continents, 6 different countries, and know more about drone law than I have ever thought possible.
Awesome. So maybe just to kick things off, can you guys, maybe Matt, I'll start with you. Do you want to explain what the FAA Part 107 certification is? Just what is that certification, and who needs to get it?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second question first. Who needs to get it? If you want to use a drone to do a job, to get paid, if flight is part of your job, then you need to be federally certified by the FAA. So if you're a freelancer, if you're a staff photographer, if you're anybody who is going to draw a paycheck and fly a drone at the same time, that it affects you. What it is to get certified is you have to pass a knowledge test that the FAA gives. It is a 60-question multiple choice test. A passing score is a 70%. What I tell my students is it's not hard, it's just work. There's a lot of really specific information that you've got to know and be able to apply. And once you know it, you can pass that test pretty easily. It's once you get over the hump on learning it, it's not that hard. But there's some tricky stuff in there. And a lot of it is stuff that you'll end up having to deal with if you fly these in the field. You'll have to learn about airspace. You have to learn about what the regulations are, who they cover, what do you have to do to comply with them, what type of weather should you be on the lookout for, all manner of different things. But you don't have to demonstrate flight capabilities. You can get a drone license from the FAA without ever having flown a drone. But that test is it. It's and it has to be taken at an FAA certified flight school. Is the other last little hitch.
Right on. So, like, maybe Aaron, what was how'd you go about trying to get certified? What was like once you realized, hey, I want to try the drone out? How'd that process go? And Andy as well. Like, how did you guys when you first realized you needed to get the license? What all was your studying process like?
I signed up for kind of an online program through DART, which is kind of a online drone aviation school. And, you know, it's pretty straightforward. There are, I think, 16 different sections and lessons, and you go through them and you take a test. And I just kind of kept studying and studying and studying. Once the test was announced, I guess that people were caught off guard, or once it came out, the test was available. People were caught off guard, and it was a little more difficult than people anticipated, a lot more on weather. And I ended up kind of like putting it off for a few weeks, and then I took it and passed it first time. Like most people that take it seriously, I haven't really heard of anybody failing one of these things yet. Yeah, the company was extremely supportive of it. I'm lucky to work for a company that values innovation in visual journalism, and you know, we made it happen. So we got our insurance, and you know, now we're trying to fly when we can.
Yeah, I would say the process, it was similar for me personally. You know, I'd been involved with the News Media Coalition, so had done a fair amount of training with Virginia Tech at their research test site with other member media organizations, and so had some familiarity with the issues that were on the test. So a lot of that for me was not new. It just really was the format, and as Aaron said, it's really not particularly difficult if you do an online course. There are several really good ones out there, and it's really, you know, putting the time in to really understand airspace, weather NOTAMs, and you know, a lot of those are things that you will need to know in the future in practical application in the field, especially when you interact with the FAA. And you know, we're already seeing this in the field. The FAA inspectors are taking this very seriously and are giving a very intense eye to drone operations, and are really looking to nitpick what your training is, what your setup is, and so it really behooves yourself to take it seriously and really be well prepared.
So going into some of that training, what are some of the things that you maybe were regulations or things you have to consider when you're flying that you maybe before you started the training just hadn't even thought about?
Airspace.
Okay.
That's the big one. Yeah, I mean, it's like every controlled airspace is everywhere in a big city, and just navigating the places that you can fly and you can't fly, and sometimes there are temporary flight restrictions, especially in a big city near sporting events. So like, we might not want to fly anywhere near a Twins game, but if we want to take a photo of the Mississippi River in downtown Minneapolis, can't fly within a couple hours of the Twins game on any given day. And there's a lot of Twins games. There's just controlled airspace everywhere in a big city, and just navigating that's been a real challenge and something that we've had to deal with quite a bit. Not been able to fly quite a few times because of that.
Gotcha.
And that's actually something I get a lot of questions about emailed to me, even by people who have passed the 107 test. Airspace is complex and it's difficult to understand, and it's if you're not looking at it a lot and thinking about it a lot, it tends to slip. So I've gotten questions of, oh, come on, I just want to fly to 100 feet, but I'm technically inside the controlled airspace of this thing, and I have to explain to them. I'm like, look, it's controlled to the surface. It doesn't matter how low you want to fly. That's what the rules are, and if you get caught, you will face substantial fines and potentially the loss of your license. So it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some really interesting technological developments that are on the horizon that hopefully will open that up on some level. Within the last 2 or 3 weeks, the FAA released a set of tiered maps around about 100 smaller airports around the country, and this is sort of their footprint of how they intend to do waivers and give guidance to local authorities, to local FAA authorities, on what they deem as is an appropriate request for waivers. So that should make the process easier in the future. But that system is not here yet, and in the meantime, the waiver process is kind of long and complex, and quite frankly, probably demands some cajoling with your local FAA folks, which we've already seen a lot of benefits of direct outreach to the FAA and explaining our program, explaining our level of training, explaining our protocols and how we operate, and that's brought about some invites to say, just blanket, well, you should apply for waiver for this airspace because we don't see a problem with your operation here. So while the FAA is really putting a direct eye on operations, they're also looking to highlight professional operators and to not be an impediment to those that are doing it properly.
Cool.
Have you been approved for any of your airspace waivers yet?
We have not, because we just started our test program 2 months ago in terms of actually getting people out and flying. So we've been doing a lot of planning and research in the year and a half going up to it now, and giant cat alert.
Said it would come, and there you weren't lying.
That'll happen.
Yeah. So we're definitely looking forward to exploring that in some of our markets. I mean, because Gannett, we have 110 markets around the country, and some of them are extremely complex airspaces, like Washington D.C. or outside New York City. which, I mean, like when we went flying today, like we literally have to drive an hour from our office just to be, just to clear the airspace where we can actually operate. So some of our markets, it's extremely challenging, and waivers, will be really necessary.
On the flip side, I have 3 waivers that have been approved here in Lincoln, Nebraska. That took all of like 20 days to get them.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
Cool. So do you have a pretty good relationship, Matt, with your local FAA folks at this point, or are they like, oh, this guy again?
I honestly don't have any relationship with the local FAA office, which is exactly how I want to keep it. And if I do have one, it's going to be very professional and cordial and
Sure.
all of that. There have been other operators in town here that the FAA has had to take a much greater interest in, and I will gladly let them be the ones they pay attention to. But everything that I've been able to do and everything I've been able to get has been through the front door and has not required any sort of meeting with local officials to try to make it happen. Now that the longer the waiver process is in place, the further backed up it gets. The FAA claims that they just couldn't have imagined that so many people would file for so many waivers, even though they explicitly forbid UAS operators from contacting the local towers and forced everybody to go through this waiver process. And then they were shocked when, they got flooded with thousands and thousands of waiver requests. I think I read somewhere they had over 5,000 waiver requests in the backlog that they haven't even looked at yet. So it went from a 90-day process where they said, apply and expect to hear something back within 90 days to now it's considerably longer in a lot of places. So I'm very hopeful for some technological changes down the road that will make this an on-demand thing. The FAA has been saying that will be in place perhaps later this year, but I would warn everyone who deals with the FAA to accept what they say on face value, but set your expectations far, far lower. They're not an organization that is known for speed and meeting deadlines.
I just got a text from one of our board members at APPM, Barry Arthur at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and he said that they've had waivers approved in a matter of days sometimes. So I'm sure it just depends on where you're at. But
months. And I applied 4 or 5 months ago for about a dozen airspace waivers all around the state and markets that we know that news happens in, from floods to just general feature type stuff. And I have an acknowledgement that they've received them, but nothing since then. So I'm not overly optimistic at this point.
You're in a Bravo airspace there in Minneapolis, which cranks up the scrutiny.
Yeah,
and that's what is at least gives us hope with the tiered maps that they released a couple weeks ago. At least you have some guidance, an idea of what the overlay looks like, because from what I've read in the process, the waiver process so far, they either accept or reject your application, but there's no qualifying criteria. There's no rationale in terms of saying, well, we accepted this because you're under the limit, or we rejected it because you were over the limit. And so it's a guessing game. This map, the way they've tiered the maps, at least it gives you some guidance to say, okay, I'm going to apply because this, this other market looks similar to one where they released a map, and this distance from the airport, they say that 150 feet would be an acceptable height limit that they would accept, as a waiver. So at least you can have some guidance there to look to kind of base your requests around.
For people who don't know what we're talking about, what happened a few months ago was that the FAA they sent letters to all of their air traffic control facilities that had controlled airspace. And they said, divide up your controlled airspace into a series of grid squares, and then assign a maximum allowable altitude at that grid square. So if it's, you know, on the ends of the runway, it's going to be 0. They won't allow any flight there at all. If it's, you know, a mile from the parallel side of the runway, you could probably go to 400 feet there. And that was what they were doing in order to help facilitate this waiver process. Was if you could magically divine what the maximum allowable altitude was at the given area that you wanted to be at with relation to the airport, and you happen to get it right, they would approve it pretty much right away. But if you said you wanted to go to 400 feet, but part of your area was only allowed to go to 200 feet, they would reject it. You'd have no idea why, and you'd have no idea where you ran afoul of it. And so that's the situation we've got. But what that means is that all over the country there are these GIS maps of airports that have this altitude at it that could be fed into some sort of automated process where, with a smartphone, you could pull up where you're at and say, here I am, here's the altitude I want to go to, can I fly here? Hit a button and it will kick back and say, yep, you can fly to 300 feet here, or 200 feet, or 75 feet, or whatever the altitude is. And then you're good to go. That's essentially, you know, the same as a pilot getting on the radio and getting permission from the tower to taxi and take off.
Yeah. So are there some apps that you guys use in the field? I know here at the Denver Post, a couple of our guys who are certified have an app that they use that can kind of check. I forget what it's called, but are there things like that you guys are using?
Yeah, there's several really good ones. I mean, the FAA has one that's before you fly. AirMap is another really good one, and I've actually met with their developers and their and some of their folks who lobby the FAA, and they're a very connected company and are really at the bleeding edge of what looks to be the technological solution to, you know, airspace requests in restricted airspace in the future. And that one really will feed you, you know, NOTAMs, airspace, you know, restricted areas based on your geolocation. It's very nice. And then if you want to get into the pay space, there are several really good pilot apps. You know, ForeFlight is a really excellent one where you can look at sectionals electronically, again based on geolocation. You know, shows you live NOTAMs, TFRs, etc. But those are all tools that, I mean, like in our kit, we include 2 iPads, and all that software is required for all our operators. You know, because you have to have it.
I used ForeFlight a lot when I was learning how to fly manned aircraft. It's fantastic, but it is a subscription based thing, and it is pretty pricey. But
yeah,
another one that hasn't come up is Kitty Hawk, which is also really good. It's very similar to AirMap, but it has some logging features in it that are pretty nice.
Yeah,
if you're looking for.
And Kitty Hawk actually gets their mapping data from AirMap.
Yeah.
And several of the logging softwares access their data through AirMap. You know, Drone Logbook.
I think DJI does too.
Yeah, DJI has integration. They're a very connected company. I mean, that's what we're seeing here in the last year or two. There have been a lot of technological players that have been sort of toying in this space, and a fair amount of them have dropped out. And the ones that are really serious and have connections to the FAA and or the major manufacturers are the ones that are kind of rising to the top now.
Yeah, we use AirMap as well, and AirMap is a really nice app. And the fact that you can kind of go through layers and there's a lot of different alerts on there when you log in, but you can turn on commercial mode and then kind of look at what you really need to see, not schools and stuff. Where the airports are and the helipads are, and it's just a very well put together app. And I really hope to see the FAA integrate that into their airspace authorization system. That'd be very convenient.
Cool. So when you guys are out in the field using the drones, how many, or when you're instructing people, how many people are usually going out with the drone? Is it just one person with the drone, or a lot of times you have a few people on a team managing everything?
Well, in our training, we mandate two-person crews. That I feel that in news gathering, when you have someone, especially at a news scene where there may be looky-loos, and you've got to potentially deal with a PIO, someone managing a camera. There's just you really need two people in order to manage distraction and to be able to stay focused on the task at hand as a pilot in command. So we mandate a pilot in charge and a VO. Our teams are both 107. Each 2-person team is, both of them are 107 certified, and they trade off roles in terms of, one flight they might be the PIC, the next flight they might be the VO, but we mandate a 2-person crew.
Cool. Can you define those acronyms for us?
A PIC is the pilot in command.
Okay.
And the VO is the visual observer.
Visual observer.
And that's also kind of shaped our decisions on hardware too. So that's why we bought Inspires, because it does separate the camera control from the pilot, the control of the craft.
Cool.
We drew up a document that kind of helps guide our editors in understanding how drone operations should take place. And I would love to live in a world where we could always have 2 people on every flight, but a lot of the times we're flying in rural areas with nobody around, over rivers and lakes and stuff. And so far we haven't really done much in the city because of the fact that we are completely enveloped for the most part by Class Bravo airspace. So it's nice to have a reporter with us to kind of keep an eye out. We've had that a few times, and there might come a time when we send out 2 people for a certain assignment because it's sensitive or there might be people around. But right now we're getting by for the most part with 1 person and occasionally a reporter kind of as backup. And I recognize that might not be the greatest system, but we have resource issues. We're not short staffed, but yeah, you know how it goes. So 2 people is preferred, but we've been getting by with 1 person for a lot of stories.
For managers, what I would advise is that you have to really think through what the assignment is and what the environment the operator is going to be working in. Yeah, I mean, I do it all the time. I go out finding rural places with nobody around in Nebraska is not hard. So I've done work out in cornfields during the harvest that I would have had to have searched for people to try to fly over. There's just nobody out there, and in that case, you've got all the time in the world to deal with whatever you got to deal with out there, and it's not a big deal. But the more complex the environment, the greater the need for people is going to be. And at a minimum, when you start getting into urbanized areas, a visual observer is going to be necessary. I would even add another person on top of that to act as a second observer, to act as somebody who's sort of keeping track of, have you got the video that you want? Have you got the photos that you want? Have you completed the mission as you've planned it? Are there people going to walk up to the takeoff and landing area? That happens all the time. The 2 most common questions I get when I'm out flying around with these things is, who are you? And then the next question is, can I fly it? And it's always no. But people are curious. They're a little uneasy at first, and then when you tell them, I'm with the university or I'm with the paper, they're like, oh wow, that's really cool. And then they want to hang out and watch. Well, they may not know where your sort of designated landing area is. They may not know your operations plan. They may not know where it's going to be coming from. So having someone around to talk to. Also, if law enforcement comes onto the scene and wants to have a chit chat with you about what you're doing, usually the person that needs to answer those questions is the pilot in command, but they need to do it after the aircraft is on the ground. So the first point of contact can be the visual observer, and they can say, okay, we're happy to have this conversation. Just let us get the aircraft safely on the ground before we continue this.
And that brings up an important point that we've instituted in all of our markets that we've rolled out. There are other media news organizations that are doing the same thing. Sinclair Broadcasting is taking an extremely similar approach, and we've actually done joint sessions with them on this. When we roll out into a new market, we do a community outreach where we reach out to all the other media members in a market, and all the local public safety officers and the local FAA authorities, to bring them in and explain what our operation is, explain what our internal rules are, explain the FAA rules, showing off the drone, showing off our safety gear. We mandate that all of our folks wear safety vests that say that they're certified pilots and do not disturb. And so that outreach really helps alleviate a lot of concerns from law enforcement and fire from the outset, and it also allows us to make contact with the heads of those organizations, so that if you do have an incident down the road with a regular officer, you can explain to them, Chief Smith already knows about this. Please reach out to him. He knows about our operation and knows the ins and outs of it. So that's already gone a long way in terms of fostering good relations with public safety and the FAA. It's also the having the FAA at those meetings has also helped with some local sheriffs that maybe the ones that when you're at a car crash scene, and they're the ones that are always trying to boss you around. They're the really difficult ones to work with. We had a joint meeting with the Sinclair station and our property in Rochester, New York, and one of the sheriffs that they've always had problems with, basically, stood up and said, "Well, I'm gonna, any accident scene from now on, I'm just gonna, call in a TFR so you guys can't fly anywhere." And so the local FAA FSDO immediately stood up and said, "Well, no, actually, you're not. I've worked this area for 20 years, and I can tell you that we've had 2 TFRs in 20 years, and here are the criteria for them. And a local car accident or fire is not one of them." So that helped a lot in terms of establishing not only our credibility as an organization and how we were approaching things, but it also let the local police and fire know that the FAA is in charge of the airspace, and they're the ones that make the call on that, not the local fire police on the ground.
I know. So can you guys, so we've talked quite a bit about the regulations here. Can you guys just talk a little bit about the kinds of images that you're getting and that you hope to get, and a little bit about what these drones offer you to get, and what do you say to people who might be like, "Oh, drone, it's just another gimmick, like it's not real photojournalism." What do you say to them, and what kind of pictures are you guys making with these things?
It's a ultra wide angle lens on a really big ladder. So I mean, it's a great storytelling tool to establish a scene, but it's not great for moments. It might be great. We're not really sure if we've had our moment yet with drones. We haven't had a massive breaking news scene that we've been able to cover with it yet. So far, it's been environmental projects, environmental stories, and it's worked really well for that purpose, to give a sense of scale and place. And so far, that's been its major purpose. But again, I don't think that drones have had their moment yet in our newsroom. I'm not sure about elsewhere, but so far, yeah, it's basically very wide shots. And I'd caution anybody that's going out to fly drones and use it for multimedia to shoot a variety of stuff on the ground too. I can't stand drone-only videos. They lack depth, and it's nice to see somebody work things from their own 2 feet as well as the sky.
I'd echo a lot of that. I mean, it's definitely much more than just beauty shots. I mean, we challenged our teams when they came into training camp. We held a week-long training camp for each of the teams. Come armed with story ideas on how you're going to use this new tool in your newsroom, and how are you going to integrate this tool in overall storytelling, and not just bring back pretty pictures. This tool just needs to be one part of a complete story you're telling. And there's certainly you know, the environmental stories, we've got a long list from several of our markets of environmental stories they want to tell using this. I mean, obviously, the aftermath of major spot news, a hurricane, tornado is an obvious application for that. When I was at the Dallas Morning News during Hurricane Katrina, we flew our own helicopter down from Dallas to Lafayette, Louisiana, and had it down there for 2 weeks, and we had a helicopter bill in six figures. Drones are a game changer in that space. That I could deploy. If God forbid the Gulf Coast was hit with a storm like that again, you could deploy 3 or 4 teams and have coverage from all over. Far more extensive, showing the scope and scale of damage than you could even with a manned helicopter, just due to cost constraints.
What I tell people is to think about scope and scale. If you have a story that has a large spatial extent, where it is difficult to adequately describe to people how big something is, the scope and scale of something is, then a drone is going to be an ideal tool in that moment. I spent 10 years in Florida and covered a whole lot of hurricanes, and there comes a point where you're just like, man, it's blowed up real good that way, it's blowed up real good that way, it's blowed up real good that way, and it all sort of looks the same. And giving people a sense of how far that extends and how far it goes, I think is the real powerful thing. To add something to this, I'm also curious about the sort of near-term future of drones in video and photography, but in data journalism, in using the same cameras that take these beautiful photos to make maps, to create geographic products, to create photorealistic 3D models of news locations, taking those models and putting them in virtual reality or augmented reality, and playing with the edges a little bit here. I think there is going to be a moment for drones in investigative and accountability journalism, but I think there's more stuff to be done. But to reiterate, it is a tool. It is just a tool. It is not a replacement for much of anything other than the longest, most flexible boom arm you've ever had in your life. And yeah, for a lot of places that can't afford a manned aircraft budget, they are a replacement. They are getting you back into the air. But it is, again, it's a camera. It's a tool. You have to tell a story with it. If there's no story and it's just pictures from the air, then congrats, you've managed to put a camera in the air.
Just for everybody who's watching, if you guys have questions, feel free to comment on our most recent Facebook post, and I can pose them to the panel live. And kind of transitioning from that, what kind of response have you guys gotten from readers or viewers so far on the drone experiments?
One cease and desist.
Nice.
Yeah, nobody's really reached out and been like, cool drone video, but the Minnesota Department of Transportation did notice and sent us a letter telling us that we needed to register and get a commercial operator's license. That's the only local feedback I've gotten, is a legal letter telling me that I shouldn't be doing it.
And was that after you already had a license?
For doing the FAA, yeah.
Okay. Huh.
So Minnesota and I think a few other states have their own set of rules, so we've had to jump through those hoops. But
gotcha.
I wish I got more positive letters about it, but I'm actually kind of happy that people just see it as a visual medium and not something special that they need to comment on.
Cool. Andy, have you guys gotten any feedback yet?
Well, I mean, we really just kind of gave the green light for operations for our folks within the last week. because we just got off of our last camp 2 weeks ago. So they're just out in the field now. So we're hopeful that in short order we're going to have a lot of great stories using the new tool.
Cool. What's been the response, Andy and Matt, from people that you guys have talked to in your trainings, just from the photographers, who are learning to use these things?
Well, I think there's a real pent up interest in this, and trying to realize how to do it legally and properly. It's interesting that we had several folks in our group who had flown drones recreationally for several years and really thought they knew really what they were doing. And I think the FAA test was a little bit of a little bit of a speed bump, but they didn't think it was that hard. And then once they got to our camp and we really put them through the ringer in terms of what we expect and the types of skills that we really need to master in the field, they really felt, well, this really is a much more serious endeavor than I kind of thought going in. And I'm really glad that we have, structure around it, because it really forces us to think ultimately about what is the story here that we want to tell. Just the nature of that, we have to have flight logs, you have to have planning, that the FAA can ding you for any of those things, that really forces to integrate the story planning aspect of it, which, unfortunately in most of our newsrooms, due to cutbacks, that planning portion that's what's gone by the wayside, and a lot of people are trying to do stories just on the seat of their pants. And so this forces a more methodical step back, really think about what is the story we want to tell here, and how do we go about doing it.
And I've heard a lot of the same thing at the pointer seminars that we've been doing. We've got 2 more yet this year. One coming up here in June in Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin, and then one in August in Portland, Oregon. And I am regularly hearing from people who go to those that they thought it would be much easier than it was, because they figured, well, I can go to Best Buy and buy one of these things, then how hard could it really be? And once we explain, what federal regulation is, and then not only that, but what good, ethical, safe conduct is, they realize that there is a much greater challenge here. For people who aren't at a large organization that have large legal staffs that are going through and putting these kinds of things together, the drone lab, my drone lab, we published our operations manual for people that walk you through these steps, that give you a template to work from, that talks about what kind of planning you need to do, what are the roles and responsibilities of people on the site. It gives you suggestions for logging, and a lot of ethical and legal questions that you may have to deal with. And honestly, the most important thing, especially when it comes to the FAA, there's checklists. There's pre-flight checklists, there's flight checklists, there's post-flight checklists. You don't do anything in a manned aircraft without a checklist. And if we want drone operations to be seen as professionalized, then we need to have these types of manuals, and they need to have checklists, and we need to follow them every single time.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that. I mean, there are definitely checklists you can get out there, either from the manufacturer or, Matt has some available. I mean, we've, developed our own based on our experience, both the research, with Virginia Tech and the, News Media Coalition. Then, and obviously some of them really need to be based around what equipment you're using, because you want things to be in a logical order. You don't want to have to jump around when you're setting up, which is a recipe for skipping a step or missing something important. And so that takes a lot of effort and time to really go through it, and go through it repeatedly, go through it in the field, with the express purpose of, try and find holes in it. Where would be the weak point for an operator to screw up? if you're thinking about this as an organization, and commit that and make sure that everyone follows that, because that really will play a big role. And if you were to have an incident, you can go back and say, well, we had a very disciplined program. We have we have a checklist. We have insurance. We have an overall insurance policy for every named pilot in our program, and that's one of the things that they required to know that we had a really organized structure like that. And that's something for anyone that's wanting to operate either as an individual or as an organization. You need to look at what your liability and insurance needs are, because your general business liability is not going to cover this. If you have an incident, they're gonna come after you with everything you got. Both from the FAA and anyone that was involved.
Would you say the checklist might be hard in a breaking news situation, or would that be like you need to, the checklist is there and you practice it, and that's, it's important to do it, because
you don't ever skip it.
You don't screw up.
I mean, it might be breaking news, but skipping the checklist is a recipe for making mistakes, for opening yourself up for risk. And again, that's part of why you repeat it. You practice and practice, and so you understand what each item on that checklist actually means, and what physical action is associated with it, or which setting on the craft you have to go through and set. And once you get familiar, you can work through it fairly quickly. But again, it's about familiarization, understanding the reason and rationale why you have all those items on the checklist.
And the thing to drive into your head to realize how serious this is that if you screw up, if you skip a step and a prop is not properly installed, or a setting is off, you could have an accident, and people could get hurt. And there is no such thing as ethical, responsible journalism that puts people's safety at risk. So you have to realize you as a drone pilot are a licensed pilot. You are a licensed aircraft pilot, and you are now responsible for the safety of people around your aircraft, both in the air and below it. And it's a responsibility that you have to take seriously. So I don't care how breaking the news is. If you put an unsafe aircraft in the air, it doesn't matter. You could cause a real problem and not get the story. I mean, let's just be real.
Right. I mean, and there was an incident, 2 or 3 months ago in Seattle where a photographer was charged and or sentenced to 30 days in jail for basically recklessly endangering. Injuring a woman. The drone bounced off a building and hit this woman, and they found that the person operated in an unsafe manner, and that was a civil penalty. That wasn't an FAA penalty. And the other important point, and we drill this into our folks, both to the pilots and to the news managers that they are going to be working with, is that you as the pilot that holds the license are personally responsible if there's an incident. It's not it's not the Daily Tribune that's going to cover it, even though they, if there's a fine, they might actually pen the check. But in terms of actual responsibility, the FAA is going to hold you personally responsible. And so that's important to know from an operator standpoint, that you have that personal obligation to safety. And it's also important for managers and editors within your organization working with your pilots to understand that your pilot in your organization, they are the ultimate arbiter of safety. They are the ones that have to make that call about whether it's safe to fly or not to fly. And if they decide not to fly because they feel it's unsafe, there should be no adverse repercussions for that, because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible, not the editor, not the paper, not the corporation.
And that's federal law. I mean, just to drive that home, that's federal law, that the pilot in command is the sole responsible authority for safety. They decide if the aircraft flies or not. And I've already in my dreams at night have already seen the first wrongful termination lawsuit coming because a drone pilot said no, and the city editor or the news director said, "The hell you say no," and boom, they fire them, and that's not okay. If the pilot says they can't conduct the flight safely, that's it. Local television news that have had helicopters for years and years and years are ahead of the game on this one, because they've had a culture around those helicopters that if the pilot says no, can't fly today, then that's it. It's ball game. Under federal regulation, a drone is no different than a manned aircraft. The pilot in command is responsible. There are rules that govern them. The FAA considers the pilot a pilot and the aircraft an aircraft, and if the pilot says no, then that's it.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, and we have that. Not only do we reiterate that in our communications to local editors, we have it in our flight operations manual very prominently. That this is the statement of our safety culture, and then basically the buck stops with the pilot, and it's their call.
Right on. I've got one question that I'd like to pose to you guys from Aiden Connolly. And this is something that I've run into with our photographers who have drones too, is there's kind of on a lot of the drones a relatively short battery life. So can you talk a little bit about how you're planning your shots before you take flight?
Lots of batteries. It helps.
I mean, I think that's very key to your mission planning, to looking and finding, okay, when is the light really right here? What are my battery inventory? How much actual real flight time do I have? Because you may look on the DJI site and it may tell you, oh, the Inspire 2 can fly for 28 minutes. Well, by the time you do your setup and you come back with safety reserves, and that really is like maybe 18 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. So you've got to really be efficient and really plan out what it is you intend to accomplish with your flights. I mean, we drill this into people with our mission plan, even in practice. What are our intended outcomes of this flight? What 3 shots do we want to get? How do we want to approach this shot? Is the VO, / camera operator, are they looking for a specific look, and that the pilot needs to execute a maneuver to enable that shot? And again, that really all goes down to how are you going to do that, because your battery life is not unlimited.
Yeah, anytime we go out, we have we generally try to have about an hour's worth of flight time with us. And by the way, that if you think about it, the 28 minutes is in a laboratory. That 20 minutes that you might get on scene after you do all your setup and your reserves is on a pretty calm day. Yeah. If it's windy.
It's not in sport mode.
No, if it's windy, or if you're in sport mode or anything like that, now you're down even lower than that. So 2 parts of mission planning that are important here are first starting with the question of what purpose does the drone serve for this story? If the purpose is, I don't know, I just thought it would be cool, then try again. So answering that question will help guide you in sort of in part of your mission planning. But if I have the time and I have the ability, a site survey. If I can go out there and walk around where I'm going to be shooting and look at things from the ground and have a better idea of what my maneuvering capabilities are, where the threats are, trees, obstructions, anything like that, where I expect people to be. Any and all of that is worthwhile to do, and that will help guide you when you get out there. Now, to quote Eisenhower, you know, all military planning goes out the window. The first bullet goes down range. So you have to be flexible when you get out there. That you get out there and you see, this looks totally different than I thought it would from the air. I've got to adjust. But that pre-flight planning, that pre-trip planning, even a day before. I mean, even if you can just pull up like a Google Street View of it, it will really help sort of set in your mind, okay, I think this shot is here. I think this shot is here. I want to try to do this also. And that gives you a place to go with it. And then hopefully you've got enough extra batteries that you can improvise a little bit.
You know, I have to say, I think one of the biggest things is just having a lot of batteries, just to emphasize that it's a camera. And the hell I'd go out in the field with one battery and just kind of hope for the best. It's good to have, you know, your gear, you know, all ready to go, all charged up, and have 2 extra batteries more than you think you need, like you would a memory card. I mean, I'm kind of a freak, and I have 4, you know, camera bodies in my car in case one goes, or sorry, camera bodies in my car in case one goes out. And I think it's a good thing to have extra batteries too. You know, they do die pretty quickly. Yeah, there you go. I know I've got like 8 for my Phantom. We've got a whole bunch for our Inspire, and you just can't be prepared enough, you know, to fly. I mean, you also have to, you know, you want to have enough batteries for what you plan for, but there is an element of serendipity in photojournalism that you can't plan for, and things happen. The light might change right when you think that you've got the good light. You might need another battery for that, so just plan ahead. You know, you're a photojournalist first, so think about having the right tools, and batteries are a big part of that.
The sad thing is these are all Phantom 2 batteries, and my Phantom 2 is deader than a doornail. So if anybody's in the market for used Phantom 2 batteries, I got you covered.
Keep those in an ammo case, Matt. Those things are hazardous.
Well,
they're on a stone windowsill, so there's nothing for it to burn.
we are almost at our hour that we usually try and keep it to. Do you guys want to maybe go around and just like a parting thought that maybe touching on something we didn't get to so far, or just close things out?
I'll do this shameless thing and pimp 2 things. Sure. One is if you are interested in doing this and you want in-person hands-on training, check out the pointer seminars that we're doing, the drone schools. By the time we're done, we'll have trained somewhere around 250 new drone pilots at the 4 that we've done. We were oversold at the first 2. I think we are sold out in Wisconsin, but I think we could squeeze a few more if you're interested. That's coming up here, I think, the 2nd week of June. And then there's another one in Portland. The other thing is, if you go to dronejournalismlab.org, you'll see a link to the operations manual. If you are in the market for an operations manual, ours is out there. It draws inspiration from a lot of different news organizations, a lot of the largest news organizations here in the country, a lot of the largest news organizations from around the world. It is a template for you to follow. It is a Creative Commons licensed document, so you can copy it, steal it, do whatever the hell you want with it. I don't care. I just want it there to help people out.
Awesome.
Yeah, just, you know, there's lots of resources out there. If you're interested in, you know, there's plenty of people to reach out to, you know, Matt, you know, lots of folks that were in the News Media Coalition early on have been very willing to share knowledge amongst the group. And we continue to keep in touch. You know, I have peers at other organizations that have similar issues as a large organization that's really helpful to have that to be able to bounce ideas off of. And remember, as everything, you know, as we've talked about, there's a lot of really serious aspects about it, but there's a lot of fun, kind of groundbreaking things that we could potentially do with this. So, you know, always be looking forward, because there's a lot of folks within your news organizations are really looking for you to, you know, to lead in this area.
You know, I've always been told, and I truly believe that you're a pilot first and a photographer second. That being said, you know, you are on a mission to make interesting visuals and good pictures and good video. So try to find your creative voice safely, but try to find it. Otherwise, it's just a really high wide-angle shot. And also a little bit of promotion. Check out the Drone Photojournalism Facebook page. A lot of people are on there, people having conversations, and if you have any questions, I'm sure you can go there and talk to people from, you know, I know Matt's on there. Andrew, are you on there?
I'll have to look at. Can you send me a link?
Sure, absolutely. The folks from the New York Times, Washington Post, you know, TV, lots of big publications are on there. I think some people from the US, from Gannett, are on there too, and it's a good place to chat with people. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
I'll have to post this video in there right after this.
Yeah, please.
And if all three of you guys have links that you'd like to share of, you know, Matt, those documents you were talking about, and then Andy and Aaron, maybe some of the work you guys have done, just feel free to send me some links, and I'll put the links on our website, so you can get those right there. And what was the name of that Facebook page again?
Drone Photojournalism.
Drone Photojournalism.
Yeah.
Facebook page. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that pretty much wraps us up. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm Pat Traylor, photo editor at the Denver Post and president of Associated Press Photo Managers. And we will have more on drones at our annual conference with Matt in Washington, D.C., October 8th through 11, along with a lot of other great content. So thanks for tuning in. Join us next time. We'll do another one of these soon, I'm sure. Have a great night. Cheers. And thanks to you guys for joining us again.
Of course.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Adios.